Having supervised counselors for many years, I've come to learn that many people get into this field because they love working with other people and they want to help. I've also come to realize that many clinicians get into this field not knowing or recognizing how much documentation is involved. As someone who has, again, worked with counselors over the years, I feel like it's just as important to have a clinician who is receptive and diligent in record keeping as they are to being a good therapist. Part of an ethical practice is talking with the clients about their rights. They're not always aware of them, and because of this, it can bring some fear into the process. If you sit down and talk to them about what the therapeutic process is going to look like, it not only helps develop rapport, but it does also help take away some of that fear. By alerting clients to their rights and responsibilities, the counselor is steering them towards a healthy sense of autonomy and personal power. We protect the rights of clients by developing procedures to help make them informed about their choices. Some of this information that we talk to them about includes the right of the client to be informed about their treatment. What does it look like? What are the expectations? What do they expect from us as counselors? We want to help them make autonomous decisions about it. What are their goals? What do they need from us? This increases the chances that the client will become involved and a willing participant in the process. We also want to talk to them about what the risks of treatment might look like. What are some things that might be brought up? What are some emotions that might be felt? And the benefits. How can we heal and grow from this experience? We also want to talk about some of the alternatives to proposed treatment. For example, if I'm working with a client that's got a lot of grief and loss going on, maybe there's a support group that can help walk them through that. Or if they're in recovery, maybe an AA meeting would be of interest to them. They need to know that there are other things they can be doing to support the therapeutic process. The informed consent document is developed to define boundaries and clarify the nature of the basic counseling relationship. Don't overwhelm the client with too much information. Please keep in mind that informed consent is an ongoing process throughout treatment. I recognize in watching the intake process, and counselors in their first meetings with clients do have a lot of paperwork and a lot of information they want to give them. They want to get it over with. Here's your informed consent. This is what we're going to do. Here's the payment process. Here's the releases of information. It's terribly overwhelming. Slow down. Help them to understand what you're telling them. Understanding is the key. Too much information can just be overwhelming, so make this something that you review throughout the therapeutic process. There are some legal aspects as to what an informed consent should look like. There are three elements that are basic to the legal definition. The first one is capacity. That means that the client has the ability to make rational decisions. If you're working with a minor, you might have to have a parent or guardian sign the paperwork. Comprehension of information. Clients receive information in a clear way that they understand. They must understand information about procedures and possible consequences. Voluntariness. This means that the person giving consent is acting freely in the decision-making process and is legally and psychologically able to give consent. The informed consent process gives clients an opportunity to ask questions and explore their expectations of counseling. Again, remember, you need to review this throughout the treatment process. They're not going to remember everything the first time. Your text talks about two different ways that you can do informed consent. It can be in a consent form with all the information that you review with the client and sign it, or you can talk about your informed consent and then you can document it, sign it, and have the client sign it. I prefer the consent form that's done throughout the therapeutic process and reviewed again and again, because it gives you a documentation to hold on to in case anything happens in the future. Remember, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. Your chapter reviews also some of the information that's critical to be in the informed consent, such as dates, names, things like that. You can review that in your chapter. Remember that the clients are partners in this process. They share the power. Your chapter includes a section on managed care because this is a critical part of informed consent now that managed care is here. Managed care is usually the organization that oversees the client's insurance. We need to let our clients know that managed care may request their diagnosis, results on any tests given, and a wide range of clinical information, treatment plans, and sometimes even the client's entire record. Help them understand the limits of confidentiality and the potential repercussions of disclosing personal information to insurance companies. Unfortunately, some services might not be covered in the insurance plans, or treatment can be terminated before the client's goals have been achieved. An adequate informed consent process can reduce the chances that a client will file a liability claim. The first meeting with the client should be to establish rapport. Since this is an ongoing process, here are some other topics to be addressed at some point. The therapeutic process. This is general ideas of the treatment process. They need to know you're going to be exploring areas that can lead to pain or anxiety. Talk about how change happens. Talk about the procedures and goals of therapy. They have the right to refuse any therapeutic technique, and let them know they can terminate counseling whenever they want. Counselors often ask many questions in the intake session and assessment process. Your clients are more likely to be cooperative and give honest information if they know and understand why you're asking them these questions. Did you know that your clients have a right to know about your background? You should provide them a description of your training, education, licenses, and credentials. I've heard some counselors say that they don't want to put their credentials on the wall because they think it's grandiose or that they're bragging. I think it's really important and that you do put your credentials on the wall because your clients have a right to know who they're working with and what your backgrounds are. Let them know if you have a supervisor. Let them know areas where you may need to refer. So for example, if you're not real proficient in substance abuse and the client, that might be a primary issue, you may need to make a referral. Help them understand right up front the costs involved in therapy. Nothing ruins a therapeutic relationship more than having problems with payment. Provide information about the cost of treatment at the beginning of services, including methods of payment. Also help them understand any limits by managed care. Handling the issues of fees poorly could cause a strain on the therapeutic relationship. Help them understand the length of therapy and the termination process. If it's brief therapy, clients should be notified of this. If managed care limits sessions, this should be discussed. So for example, I know that a lot of companies have EAP or employee assistant programs. And what this means is that it allows their employees to see counseling for a certain amount of sessions. It's usually anywhere from 6 to 10. They need to know that after the limited amount of sessions that their insurance company is no longer going to pay for continued services. The issue of termination should be openly explored by the counselor and the client. I see this as a weakness in many clinicians. They don't want to talk about termination, so it's not something they bring up, but it really is a crucial phase of treatment. Trainees that are training to be counselors will need to have supervision, at the very least peer consultation. Let clients know if you're going to be doing this. Also, it's a good practice to explain that there may be some interruptions in therapy. Help them understand this early in the course of treatment so that when there are these unexpected interruptions, they'll understand and know how you're going to handle them. Every counselor has a right to take vacation. Your clients need to know that you may be gone for a week or two at a given time and what you're going to do to make sure that they're taken care of during that period. We don't want our clients to feel abandoned. If another counselor is going to fill in, there must be a written consent from the client to provide the substitute counseling. We talked a little bit earlier about some alternatives to traditional therapy. They may need some help from other systems. Be familiar as counselors with your community resources, self-help groups. If you're going to be recording the therapy session for any reason, training, supervision, the clients must give their consent, and this consent must be documented in the clinical record. The clients do have a right to decline. Be sure to let them know how the recordings will be used, who will have access to them, and how they're going to be restored. Did you know that your clients have a right to access their files? They have a legal right to inspect and obtain copies of records kept on their behalf by professionals. Write about the client in a descriptive and non-judgmental way, and be cautious about what you include in your clinical notes. Make sure that you're not putting anything in there that you're not qualified to be diagnosing. Years ago, I remember a clinician who was a substance abuse counselor. He was not trained to be a mental health counselor. And he wrote in the clinical file, "I think this client is crazy. I think he's got mental health issues," and was very vague in the description. Unfortunately, his employer required him to provide a copy of the client's file in order for him to go back to work. The employer read this information by the substance abuse counselor, and the client was fired because the employer thought that he was crazy. The counselor was fired also, unfortunately. So be professional, stay within your scope of practice, and be very careful what you write in the file. Your client should be informed if they're being given a diagnostic label. Unfortunately, many insurance companies require this if they're going to reimburse, but it's important that your clients understand that a diagnosis can become a permanent part of their file. Some counselors have concerns about labeling clients, exploitation of the exploited. So I know that I've heard situations where clients try to get health insurance or even medical insurance, and were unable to because they had a diagnosis. Clients should be educated regarding matters pertaining to confidentiality, privileged communication, and privacy. Be sure to inform clients of the limits of confidentiality, which we're going to talk more about in the next chapter. Clients in managed care programs need to be told that the confidentiality of their communications might well be compromised. Counselors may need to disclose sensitive information to third parties like insurance companies who are in a position to authorize initial or additional treatment. Lastly, the benefits and risks of treatment. Now is a good time to establish the role of the client in the treatment process. What is their responsibility?